What's up guys, JV2017 here, and today I'm going to share my best advice on when you should evolve your Pokemon in Pokemon GO. Over the first 15 levels of the game, I always struggled with knowing when I should evolve a Pokemon, when I should spend that hard-earned stardust to power them up, or when I should just wait until I catch a better version of the same Pokemon. It's frustrating because the game really doesn't do a good job of telling you how good or bad your Pokemon are when compared to each other. However, there are a few indicators that the game doesn't really explain that tell you whether or not you should invest in evolving or powering up a particular Pokemon. These strategies are best used as early as possible so that you can save up your Stardust for when you really need it most. First and foremost, it's important to remember that the higher your trainer level, the higher combat power Pokemon you will catch out in the wild. This also goes for hatching eggs, using incense, and sitting at lures. You will get better Pokemon the higher your level is, and nothing changes that. With that in mind, it's a popular strategy to never power up your Pokemon or use Stardust at all before level 20. That's because you're inevitably going to get better Pokemon later down the line. By that logic, it would be a waste to spend a ton of Stardust powering up your 400 CP Vaporeon, for example, when you're going to catch a ton of 600 EVs around level 20. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not sure how people can completely save their Stardust. I definitely didn't because I was always competing with friends to have the highest combat power Pokemon, and Stardust allowed me to power things up and stay competitive. The problem with that is that I'm now level 21 and I have a few Pokemon over 1600. They could be higher, but I have no Stardust. I have 300 Stardust, and so that's the only thing limiting me from getting better. That's because I wasted it before I got the better Pokemon. So the best, most ideal strategy is to save all of it until you get some legitimately good Pokemon. Until that point, just deal with whatever Pokemon you got out in the wild without powering it up, and then you'll have a ton for when you can actually pump it into some great Pokemon. So that's just something to definitely keep in mind as you're leveling up. But now let's talk about how you can tell whether an individual Pokemon is worth spending Stardust on or worth evolving. The first indicator is the Stardust required to power them up. Taking a look at my best Pokemon, you will see that they all have one thing in common. They require a lot of Stardust to power up. They're all at least 2,500 Stardust, and some cost even 3,000. That's because they're already very far into their CP curve along the top of the screen. I can't power them up that much more before I'm maxed out and I have to wait until I level up. So, a great rule of thumb is to not evolve or power up a Pokemon unless they require at least 2,000 Stardust to power up. At my level, I don't evolve or power up anything below 2,200 CP. It's just not cost effective to spend a ton of Stardust powering up a Pokemon that starts at, let's say, 900 combat power, because you're bound to catch a better version of the same Pokemon at some point. Let's take a look at a more specific example. Here are my stable of Pidgeys. I have plenty of them, and I'm sure you do too. I have a 298 CP at the top who requires 2,200 Stardust to power up. By my standard, that's a pretty good Pidgey and has potential to become a great Pidgeotto and an even better Pidgeot. Let's compare that to this 111 Pidgey. The progress is not nearly as far along the CP curve, and it only costs 800 Stardust to power up. When you compare these two, clearly the 298 is the better evolution option or power-up option. I would be wasting Stardust by powering up the 111, and also wasting candies if I decided to evolve that instead. Now, most likely, this Pidgey, the 111, probably was caught at a lower level, and so at some point, this 111 probably looked really impressive compared to the rest of the Pidgeys that I had, but in reality, I was going to catch that 298 in the future. So that's why you want to save until you're around level 20 and until the Stardust is at least 2,000 required to power up. So that's the most general basic example of what I'm talking about, but now let's look at an example that is actually an exception to this Stardust rule. We've got the same 298 Pidgey with the 2,200 power-up requirement, but I've also got a 292 Pidgey that requires 2,500 Stardust to power up, which is higher. So we've got the higher CP with the lower power-up requirement versus the lower CP with the higher power-up requirement. Should I evolve the 298 or the 292? You would think it's the 292 because of the Stardust rule, but the answer is actually the 298 for one main reason. This Pidgey has the higher potential level on the CP curve at the top of the screen, which basically means I can power up this Pidgey further than I can the other one. All Pokemon that you catch have a hidden base combat power that can either be higher or lower, so if you're comparing two Pokemon, one is more often than not going to be better than the other one. I can tell just by eyeballing it that this 298 Pidgey has more potential to be powered up. It has more room on the curve by a small amount, and it's the higher CP level. So that's why in this particular case, you would evolve this one instead of the 292. Let's go ahead and look at another example before we wrap up the video. I have this 656 Poliwhirl, which requires 2200 Stardust to power up, and I'm comparing that with a 626 Poliwhirl that needs 2500 Stardust. Now normally you would go with the 626 because it has the higher Stardust, but the CP curve shows that the 656 Poliwhirl has a lot higher potential. It's not as far on the curve, and it also has a higher CP. So in this case, it's better to save the candies to evolve the 656 Poliwhirl, since it's just a better version of the same Pokemon. Since we've been working with a lot of numbers in this video, here are the summarized rules on whether or not you should evolve or power up your Pokemon. Number 1, generally speaking, wait until you're around level 20. You're going to catch better Pokemon the higher your trainer level is, so investing in a Pokemon at a lower level is usually not a good idea because it will be replaced. Number 2, wait until your Pokemon require at least 2000 Stardust to power up or evolve. Otherwise, you're wasting Stardust by powering them up because you will catch another better version of the same Pokemon. It's just a matter of time and location. Number 3, once you've reached that point of being over level 20 and having Pokemon with at least 2000 Stardust, the Pokemon with the higher Stardust is usually the better one when comparing the two. The only exception is when the CP curve shows that the lower Stardust has more power-up potential than the other, as I showed in my examples. Some people also consider attack power and attack moves when choosing to evolve or power up a specific Pokemon. You can factor that in too, but just know that evolving a Pokemon usually gives it a new set of attacks with new attack values. Everything changes when you make that decision, so you can't really control that unless you're comparing Pokemon that don't evolve or can't evolve any further. That's all I have to share in this video, but I'd like to hear from you guys. What are your strategies for, maximizing your evolutions and power-ups? Do you wait until a certain point like I do? Share all of what you guys are doing in the comment section below. If you learned something new or enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button. I would really appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe for more Pokemon Go videos coming in the near future. Talk to you guys next time. Peace.